Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Humanitarian Threats of Nuclear Weapons. We're so glad that you could join Juan for this presentation, and we're very excited to hear from Dr. Catherine Thomasson of Physicians for Social Responsibility. My name is Adzi Vokila. I am the Senior Juan Will Program Associate here at WAND, and I will be running the technology today. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. All attendees are going to be muted during the presentation. If you have any questions for Dr. Thomasson, please submit them by typing them into the questions section of your attendee panel, which you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. After Dr. Thomasson finishes her presentation, I'll ask these questions aloud. If you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, please contact GoToWebinar directly. They can be reached at 1-800-263-6317. Now I'll turn it over to Kathy Robinson, WAND's Senior Public Policy Director. Kathy?
Thank you, Adzi, and thank you to everybody who's joining us today. And today is kind of a special day, an appropriate day to have this discussion. Today is the anniversary of the dawn of the nuclear age, really, the first ever nuclear weapons explosion, codenamed Trinity. And there's lots of interesting sort of poetry around the Trinity test, but I find it particularly interesting that it occurred in a place called the Jornada del Muerto Desert. And it seems to me that 68 years later, we're all still wandering in the desert, trying to figure out how to end this nuclear weapons age, except that for a lot of people, nuclear weapons really doesn't seem to be the kind of existential threat that it actually is. There's not, for a lot of people, very much focus on what a nuclear disaster would look like, what could happen. Physicians for Social Responsibility for over 50 years now, I think, has focused on trying to help people to understand this, not in a way to terrify us, but in a way to help us to be encouraged to work towards nuclear abolition. And we are very, very pleased to have Dr. Catherine Thomasson, who is an internal medicine physician and has worked as a physician for 30 years. And has also, in the history of her career, sort of interwoven policy development and political work, and has worked on nuclear weapons disarmament issues, both in Oregon and now as the Executive Director of Physicians for Social Responsibility. We're very happy to have her as a colleague here in Washington. And I'm excited to hear the presentation today about the humanitarian threats of nuclear weapons. Are we ready to have Catherine begin?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm sure the organizers will let me know if the sound is not adequate, but it's really a pleasure for me to be here today. I very much enjoy working with WAND and Will here in DC, and have certainly worked with them over the years on nuclear weapons issues and improving the health of the United States citizens and the globe. Even before, of course, I was Executive Director of PSR, I, like many of you, have talked to others about nuclear weapons. And I'm not doing it to paralyze you with fear today, but rather to inspire you to take action. I'm going to remind us about the devastation of nuclear weapons and also present some new information on the global impact of the so-called limited nuclear exchange. And then invite you to join us on a campaign to provide you with some new tools to take additional action and get more people involved so that we can achieve elimination of nuclear weapons. Back in 2007, there was a presentation given by Dr. Ira Helfand at the Royal Society of Medicine, as you may or may not be able to read from the logo on the lower left there, which outlined new data being published back in 2007 and ongoing till today about the climate impacts of even a limited nuclear strike, meaning 50, 100 nuclear weapons exchanged, modeled between India and Pakistan. As a result of that, international activity has been pretty significant. The International Committee for the Red Cross and Red Crescent Society made this statement: nuclear weapons are unique in their destructive power, in the unspeakable human suffering they cause, in the impossibility of controlling their effects in space and time, and in the threat they pose to the environment, to future generations, and indeed to the survival of humanity. As a result of this new information, they passed a resolution in 2011 calling on all their affiliates to educate the public and to pressure their governments to take action to eliminate nuclear weapons. Physicians for Social Responsibility and the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War released an updated report in April 2012 at the Nobel Laureates Conference in Chicago. Despite a strong media launch, there was very little news coverage in the United States. CNN ran an opinion editorial, and several other papers carried the story, but it didn't gain any significant traction. The U.S. State Department and the P5 governments didn't really take any action either. Worldwide, however, there were over 150, almost 200 articles touting this new information. And as a result of the international movement up until that point, as well as the release of additional information, a variety of European governments, International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War, and many other organizations arranged for a meeting in Oslo for two groups, for a non-governmental organization group as well as a governmental meeting. 127 governmental representatives came together to hear about the information of the climate impacts of a limited nuclear war, as well as the cost of nuclear weapons, the radiation, and the need for speedier action to eliminate them. However, the P5, the U.S., Britain, France, China, and Russia decided together that they would not attend this meeting. However, other countries that were nuclear weapons countries, such as India and Pakistan, did attend. As a result, PSR and other organizations feel very strongly that we have to take action to change that behavior on behalf of our own government. And we've launched the Humanitarian Threats of Nuclear Weapons campaign here in the United States. Our purpose is to develop new speakers, and I'm hoping that some of you on the line will become a new speaker, to influence audiences such as peace groups and church groups and the policymakers, not only the legislators, but community leaders across the country to get involved. We've presented this information to the American Red Cross, and we will be presenting this information to the International Rotary in the coming year. We are also encouraging, through this campaign, for groups of organizations as well as individuals to develop relationships with their legislators so that they can provide them information over time about nuclear weapons. So why do we care? Nuclear weapons really are very different from conventional weapons. They're capable of causing death, injury, and illness on a scale our sophisticated modern medical care cannot meet. So I'd like to walk you through that information. I know that many of you know it already, but within 1/100th of a second of the detonation of a nuclear bomb, a fireball would form, reaching out for 2 miles in every direction, which is 4 miles across, for a 20 megaton bomb. Within this area, temperatures would rise to 20 million degrees Fahrenheit, which is hotter than the surface of the sun. Everything within that initial round zone shown here over Boston would be vaporized. The buildings, the people, the trees, the upper level of the earth itself. In the green zone, to a distance of 4 miles in every direction, or 8 miles across, the blast would generate winds in excess of 600 miles an hour and blast pressures greater than 25 pounds per square inch. Forces of this magnitude can destroy anything that humans can build. Even underground shelters would collapse. The next gray ring show to a distance of 6 miles in every direction. The heat would be so intense that the automobile sheet metal would melt, and the radiation would result in 100% fatality. To a distance of 10 miles in every direction, the blast would still generate winds in excess of 200 miles an hour and blast pressures greater than 10 pounds per square inch. As you can see from this completely devastated city of Hiroshima, forces of this magnitude leveled wood frame buildings, masonry buildings. Even a modern steel and concrete building would see its floors and walls swept out, with just the steel skeleton remaining. To a distance of 16 miles in every direction, the heat would be so intense that everything flammable would burn. Wood, paper, cloth, gasoline would all ignite. Hundreds of thousands of fires would, over the next half hour, coalesce into a giant firestorm, 32 miles across, covering 800 square miles. Within this entire area, the temperature would rise to 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. All of the oxygen would be consumed, and every living thing would die. Beyond this great firestorm, the destruction would continue. There would be hundreds of thousands, if not more, people suffering severe injuries, crush injuries, penetrating injuries, extensive burns, blindness from retinal burning. Radiation, of course, is a unique risk of this weapon. The illness caused by radiation can cause death in days to weeks if one wasn't vaporized by the heat and blast. This is true regardless of any other injury. Even in those not immediately made ill by radiation exposure, radiation can cause immune problems, birth defects, or fetal demise, as well as cancers for years into the future. All of these people would need intensive medical care, but it wouldn't be available. The hospitals would be destroyed. Most of the doctors and nurses and other health professionals would be dead. There would be no electricity to run the ventilators or the cardiac monitors. Most of the medical supplies would be exhausted within hours. And the vast majority of these people would not receive any medical care at all. They would die alone and in great pain. If this attack were part of a large-scale war between Russia and the United States, this level of destruction would be visited on every metropolitan area in the U.S. and in Russia. A study by Physicians for Social Responsibility, published in 2003, showed that if just 300 of the warheads in the Russian arsenal detonated over urban targets here in the United States, between 75 and 100 million people would die in the first half hour. In addition, the entire economic infrastructure would be destroyed. The transportation system, the communications network, the public health system, all the things that a modern industrial country requires to maintain its population, all of these things would be gone. It is probable that in the ensuing months, the vast majority of the U.S. and Russian population, those who were not killed outright, would die from starvation, exposure, epidemic disease, or radiation. Now, I have described the medical consequences of a single nuclear explosion. Dr. Ira Helfand of Physicians for Social Responsibility, shown here in a screenshot of a video that we have put together, authored a report putting together the research of modeling that would occur, impacts on the climate, if Pakistan and India had a war using a total of 100 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons. As this slide shows, there would, of course, as you've already heard, then be immediate death and illness, and that would be in the millions in that densely populated part of Asia. However, the model also considers what would result because of the material that would become airborne, the impacts on the climate for the rest of the world. The fires, as well as the blast, would shoot soot high into the atmosphere. It would absorb sunlight that would come into the earth and therefore decrease the temperature at the surface. It would also decrease the amount of light reaching the surface of the planet, and the resultant temperature drop would be 1.3 degrees centigrade. It would also result in a decrease in precipitation. This is a graph of global climate change, as we all know. It's on the rise. I don't recommend a limited nuclear exchange to solve global climate change, but this graph shows that the drop in temperature is immediate and it lasts up to 10 years. These calculations about the consequences of a limited nuclear war were foreshadowed by the April 1815 Tambora volcano in Indonesia. This is the most powerful volcanic eruption in the last 10,000 years, and it put large amounts of ash and smoke into the Earth's atmosphere. This was followed by a drop in world's temperatures by about 0.7 degrees centigrade or 1.25 degrees Fahrenheit. The growing season across the northern hemisphere was shortened and caused a doubling of grain prices. So we have evidence that not only can we see this by climate modeling with the very sophisticated climate modeling that we have today, but we've seen it historically. There have been a number of studies done by a variety of researchers, of which this graph is only one example, that looks at grain production in various parts of the world. This represents a 2011 study by Dr. Ozdogan, who examined the effect of climate change that would follow the modeling I explained with using 100 nuclear weapons between Pakistan and India. This is a representation of the impact of 4 sites in the U.S. Corn Belt, one each in Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. And this graph shows the probability of different levels of change from baseline at each of the 4 sites averaged over the 10 years following the war. The x-axis shows the percent decrease in corn production, and the y, the percentage of the computer runs predicting that level of change. At each site, the most probable effect is an average decline of about 10% over the full decade following the war. Other sites and crops have been studied, such as rice crops in parts of China, soybeans, and wheat. Almost all of them show significant reductions. At this point in time, we in the world are ill-prepared to deal with this kind of major drop in world food supply. As of March of this year, global grain stocks were equal to approximately 70 to 80 days of consumption, lower than at any point in the last 50 years. These stocks would not provide any significant reserve in the event of a sharp decline in global production. The biggest impact, not only on acute populations, is on the 925 million people who are already malnourished. At baseline, this nearly 1 billion folks receive less than 1,750 calories a day. Most adults need between 1,800 and 2,200 depending on their activity and their size. 10% decline would cut their intake by 175 calories a day, and especially if the famine persisted for a full decade, this entire group would be at risk of dying from starvation. If market prices cause a large spike, the decline in food consumption would be even greater in countries such as Indonesia, Malaysia, Taiwan, and others that don't produce enough food for their own populations and have to import them. So we can say that up to 1 billion people would potentially die from starvation with just the detonation of 100 nuclear weapons. What does that tell us now? Well, it basically tells us that we need to fundamentally change our thinking about nuclear weapons. Are they something that we can continue to tolerate on the planet? We certainly know that the potential for an accident, the potential for a false alarm and detonation of and launch of weapons by the United States or by Russia, as both have arsenals that are on high alert and can be launched within 15 minutes. So the scenario between the United States and Russia has been present, and actually in 1995 there was a significant risk that this would have actually occurred. Now we also know, based on this research, that a relatively credible scenario of an incident between India and Pakistan can also result in huge humanitarian impacts globally from the use of nuclear weapons. So what shall we do about that? The international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons is very strong across the world, in Australia, in Europe, in parts of Asia. ICAN's message is one of hope, and they ask us all, can you imagine a world without nuclear weapons? Here in this country, again, that message has not taken off, and we need to help it happen. So first, we have a petition that we strongly recommend all of you sign that's been endorsed by numerous individuals, numerous groups, that states any use of nuclear weapons would have catastrophic humanitarian and environmental consequences. I call on my government to initiate and support negotiations for a treaty to outlaw and eliminate nuclear weapons at the earliest possible time. So it's very important, and I know that you've joined us on this call, to participate, to take action. Again, as I said, we have campaign materials. Ashish Sinha is our program manager for this campaign, and you can email him or phone him, as you'll receive an email after this presentation, to get involved. With PSR chapters, without PSR chapters, we have created a video that covers all this information that I've just presented. It's downloadable from our website, and it's exactly 14 minutes long. Part of the reason for the length is to ensure that all the information is conveyed, and that even in Rotary visits where you get exactly 20 minutes to give your pitch and to get people involved and well-informed, you still have time for questions and can actively get people to sign petitions. We want people on this call to share the video, to get participants to sign the petition, and to sign up on our website and with WAND to continue this campaign. We also have materials that explain about the basics of nuclear weapons so that the people, the audience you have, can have that information as well. So I hope that this has triggered lots of questions about what you can do. potentially some questions about the material itself, and I'd love to hear what you all are thinking after this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thomasson. That was really informative and, frankly, a little bit scary, but also I think it's helping us understand the importance of taking action on this issue. I know that our audience has lots of questions, and once again, please submit your questions using your attendee panel and typing them into the question box, and I'll ask them aloud. But before we take questions, I'm going to turn it back over to Kathy Robinson, our Senior Public Policy Director. Kathy?
Oh, hi. I think I'm just supposed to kill a little time while you're all getting a chance to write some questions in. But we really want to thank you for joining us today. And as Catherine said, Dr. Thomasson said, that really we want this to be a call to action for you and to help us to spread the word about what we can and must do to help rid the world of nuclear weapons. And up here on the screen now is the contact information for WAND and our state legislative program will. And we invite you certainly to contact us to figure out other ways to be engaged. And we will also be sending out to you the information from this webinar, a recording, as well as a link to the short video, the 14-minute long video that Dr. Thomasson mentioned, and information about the petition. And I would also just mention that we anticipate soon that there will be some further debate on Pentagon spending and possibly nuclear weapons-related issues in the Congress when the House considers the Defense Appropriations Bill. So in the next week, either the end of this week or next week, look for some action alerts from us about that. There's likely to be some amendments offered about missile defense and also some other amendments, we hope, to reduce some of the nuclear weapons delivery systems. And with that, Adzi, do you have some questions now?
We have a few questions starting to trickle in.
Okay.
Our first question is from Jeff Patterson, and Jeff asks, what is Congress doing about this, and what should they do?
Well, that's a good question. Congress, am I unmuted?
Yes, you're unmuted.
Okay. Congress is not debating this issue. Congress is nibbling around the edges with concerns about the vast amounts of money that are being spent to upgrade these nuclear weapons, of which we have probably 7,000 that need to be dismantled. But they are not even considering elimination of nuclear weapons. So the purpose of the campaign is to get more people to understand that that is the solution, that there really isn't any other way to deal with this. Nuclear weapons are not a weapon that we can use in any type of warfare. That doesn't deter illogical leaders or terrorist groups, so it's not very effective as a deterrent. So we need to change the public dialogue and create public dialogue so that our Congress people are hearing from people like us, as well as community leaders, in which reaching across a much broader population representation to hear that this is kind of the action they need to take. They are giving President Obama a lot of significant flack for stating that we should go down from the level that we're at to 1,000 weapons, which are still, as you have heard today, vastly more than would destroy humanity as we know it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Nathan Ruggles. Nathan asks, has legislation been sponsored in Congress in either the House or Senate calling for elimination or additional reductions in nuclear weapons?
No, they haven't. Generally, the reductions in nuclear weapons comes through, up until this point, has come through treaty negotiations. And given that Russia and the United States hold the greatest number of nuclear weapons, those negotiations have primarily gone on between the two. We've signed onto a treaty, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, that states in Article 6 that we are obliged to move towards elimination of nuclear weapons. But again, this international movement is really helping to push the fact that we're not moving fast enough, that an accident could happen, that a regional war could happen, and we're not moving fast enough to eliminate nuclear weapons as a whole. The problem with the Congress is that they hold up treaties like the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, even the New START Treaty, by asking the president, well, if we sign this treaty, which is what you want, then you have to spend a lot of money to refurbish the nuclear weapons we already have, because they want to hang on to them.
All right. Our next question is from Florindo Tronsoletti, and I apologize if I said that incorrectly. The question is, what's the current status of nuclear disarmament talks globally?
Is Ashish on the line? Perhaps he'd like to answer that one.
All right, Ashish, you have been unmuted.
Great. So there have been sort of a variety of different things that have been going on internationally in terms of nuclear disarmament talks. One of the ones that Catherine touched on was an effort that's largely being led by the non-nuclear weapon states, and going through a series of meetings, one that was in Oslo earlier this year, and one that will be followed up early next year in Mexico City, which is non-nuclear weapon states sort of looking at some of the data in terms of the impact of nuclear weapons, and also having a side discussion about how can non-nuclear weapon states hold the nuclear weapon states to their non-proliferation treaty obligations. Historically, the non-nuclear weapon states have also tried to put pressure on nuclear weapon states through things like the nuclear weapons-free zones and other sort of very positive contributions to the overall effort. And so that's one effort that's being done. In the United Nations, there's also an open working group of countries that are working towards trying to move the process along in terms of having a discussion about fissile material treaty, as well as other sort of next steps towards curbing nuclear proliferation, as well as moving towards abolition eventually. But the main concern is the P5 and their involvement or in the overall talks for abolition. And so one of the things that we've felt for some time is that the United States and other countries, while they've been making sort of useful incremental steps towards reducing the overall number of nuclear weapons, we don't see an overall push for the type of changes needed for abolition. And we think this problem is urgent, and we don't think that we can continue to wait for incremental steps to take hold. And so we're looking for ways to pressure the United States and other nuclear weapon states to take bolder action.
Thank you. Our next question is from Ben Chalice. Ben asks just a question about the setup of the campaign. Is it designed to mobilize public pressure on legislators or to build an NGO network to put pressure on governments?
It's really both. Here in the United States, our goals in the first year are to develop the materials which we've worked on to get into the hands of people like yourselves, into the hands of WAND, Peace Action, peace groups that are local and regional, to take out into various public venues, as well as our own PSR chapters and members. We like targeting the Rotary clubs, again, because the Rotaries tend to be people who are leaders within their community. They are required to have a speaker at every one of their meetings, and they give them 20 minutes. Likewise, they have been open to considering this topic as something that they would want to take on worldwide. So it's getting the information out. Once that's happening and building within a community, developing a group of groups or a number of individuals from a variety of groups to regularly make contact with their legislator to make sure that they know, oh, we can cut the budget for the B-61, or we can cut the budget for some of the refurbishments of the nuclear weapons, and that there are people who are regularly contacting those legislators to let them know that the drive really is for elimination of nuclear weapons and why. Likewise, getting this information and putting it out in letters to the editor, in opinion editorials, further influences the rest of the public, as well as the legislators, because they read those items. And then gradually, over the next several years, trying to create larger public events that will involve the American Red Cross or the Red Cross in various states and various cities and regions, the Rotary, and other organizations that can come together and provide this information on a much more public and visible level will also influence the legislators.
Thank you. Our next question is from Richard Duda. Richard asks, small countries view nuclear weapons as vital for their security vis-a-vis nations with huge conventional forces. How can they be persuaded to give them up without providing mutual security?
Well, that certainly is an issue. There's precedent for it to have already occurred. South Africa gave up nuclear weapons that they had already built. South Korea was on the path to building nuclear weapons, and once they were discovered, opted to decrease or get rid of their nuclear weapons program. There are very significant treaties and promises of protection from other countries. There can be, and there should be, from our own government and other large nuclear weapons containing countries that promises not to threaten first use of nuclear weapons. But again, that totally eliminating nuclear weapons will help convince other countries to do the same.
All right, our next question is from Susan Cundiff. And Susan asks, to whom would the petition you mentioned be delivered? Hiroshima Nagasaki events coming up might be a good place to get signatures on the petition.
Ashish, you want to handle that?
Sure. So the petition is part of a global effort with the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And so the place that it's going to be delivered is at the Mexico City meeting, which is the follow-up to the Oslo conference that occurred earlier this year. And so the last conference had about 127 nations that had assembled. The next one, we're not exactly sure how many will be participating, but it will be a presentation to the assembled delegates at that meeting. Though this past week was actually the nuclear, sort of a nuclear abolition week for the international campaign, and a number of different countries are using that petition locally and also delivering the signatures within their country to either their foreign ministries or their respective elected officials. And so there's definitely ways to be able to use that petition to have conversations with lawmakers, especially with lawmakers that we think could be champions on this issue, to encourage them to get part of this overall effort. And the Hiroshima Nagasaki commemorations would be an excellent place for the petition, and also some of the language that Catherine talked about today and from the video. It's just a very sort of I guess, authentic way to bring up some of these issues. If you're interested in getting any of the information, there'll be a follow-up email after the presentation, which will include a link to the petition that you can distribute, as well as a link to the video.
All right, our next question is from Reverend Rich Peacock. Reverend Peacock asks, how important is the effort by the mayor of Hiroshima calling for the abolition of nuclear weapons by 2020 and for Hiroshima to host the Olympics in 2020?
Personally, I feel that all efforts that raise awareness and allow for use in media of any type to get this message across is very worthwhile. So there has been an organization called Mayors for Peace, which was started and founded by the mayor of Hiroshima, that many cities have signed on to. So going back to your city, if it has a new mayor, and getting them to sign on to it, again, raises awareness of this issue for people who probably don't know very much about it. So again, I think that here in this country, unlike Australia, Denmark, Finland, many other countries that understand this better, and globally, the groundswell of the public who feel that this should happen really needs to be encouraged here in the United States. Just to let you, I was speaking with 2 PSR members around other issues, and I asked the one woman who doesn't work on nuclear weapons issues, and I asked her, how many weapons do you think the United States has? And she looked at me and said, well, I have no idea. And I said, well, hazard a guess. And this is a great line to ask your friends and colleagues. And she said, 50? People don't have a clue. And, you know, if they did, there would be more action taken. So it's a big undertaking to elevate our public's awareness, particularly our legislators and our community leaders' awareness. But we can do it, and we need to. Thanks.
Our next question is that the U.S. government declined to participate in the Oslo conference, as did the other P5 nuclear weapon states, Russia, Britain, France, and China. Do you expect that the U.S. or these other countries will be in Mexico City?
Well, that's an excellent question, and it's the power of pressure on any government by the people is something that we can't underestimate. And I was very pleased to have the Undersecretary of State on Nuclear Weapons Issues, Rose Gottmuller, calling PSR, WAND, and a number of organizations and getting on a conference call with us to try and explain why they weren't there. I was impressed that we had already given them enough pressure to make them have to explain what they were doing. I've heard their official speakers speak about that subsequently. So basically what they're saying is we have a process. It has to move forward slowly. It has to go through the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And we have to take these step by step because every step has to be verified. And I don't disagree with that. However, we have been working with them, as have other organizations, in trying to convince them that going to a conference that acknowledges that there's huge humanitarian threats from nuclear weapons doesn't bind you to anything, but it shows that you're concerned, and it provides a real strong leadership to the other nuclear weapons countries. So there is, I think, a small amount of hope that they may go to this one. If not to Mexico City, perhaps to the next. And part of it depends on how much pressure we can bring to bear.
Yeah, that's a good point. Our next question is from Jesse Calkins. Jesse asks, we often talk about the well-known nuclear bombs being dropped in Japan. Would the Castle Bravo test and subsequent poisoning of the Bikini Atoll and the need to move all of the island's inhabitants to another home be something that's also observable to this very day? And would that be worthwhile to talk about in meetings on these issues?
Absolutely. There are still hot spots from the testing of nuclear weapons. Some of these radionuclides don't disappear overnight. They stay for decades and centuries and hundreds of centuries. So these are very toxic items. We help support people from that region going to the UN to speak to their own, to witness to their own situation. So continuing to bring up impacts of nuclear weapons that have already occurred, I think, is very worthwhile.
Okay, great. Our next question is from Senator Nan Orrock in Georgia. Senator Orrock asks if you can update us on the status of the B-61 nuclear bomb refurbishment, as well as the status of where we are with the New START treaty.
I'll take the New START and I'll give Ashish B-61. The New START treaty was signed and ratified in, I believe, fall or in late 2011. So it has been passed. We are actually behind as a country in decreasing or dismantling the numbers of weapons that are required by the treaty. The numbers are to go down to around 1,300 weapons that are launch usable or ready. And actually, that's one of the difficult points, that Russia is already further along than we are and is concerned that we are so far behind. So the New START treaty has happened. It's been ratified. We're on our way down, and that's fantastic. But that still leaves us with many nuclear weapons. So Ashish, you want to talk about B-61?
Sure. So the B-61, there's been a lot of debate both in the House and Senate, and partly because of the work of WAND, PSR, and other groups, there have been a number of Democrats and other lawmakers who have been raising the issue to try to make sure that this life extension program, one of the first in a series that will be coming up over the next few years, either gets rejected or at least gets trimmed so it's not such a waste of taxpayer dollars. The Senate approved a reduction in their version of the budget about $168 million versus Obama's request of the B-61 life extension program. The House just had a debate, and there was a series of amendments that had been proposed to try to take down the amount that the House had appropriated for this life extension program. As you know, the House of Representatives is a little more difficult for us just because there is a stronger contingent of representatives who are more ideologically likely to support these sort of spending projects, especially when it's considered to be in our defense. Yet there was a strong vote for an amendment by Quigley and Polis that was going to reduce the B-61 budget by, I think, approximately $23 million. It did fail eventually after, I think, 196 people voted for it, with 30 Republicans actually supporting the amendment. So while it was a failure in the House and we did get some success in the Senate, we think that because there were more lawmakers starting to support these type of reductions, it's actually a reason to celebrate and a reason to keep on sort of pushing forward. Our hope is that we can continue to build on the amount of Republicans who support these type of reductions, and there's a lot of reason to think that the fiscal conservative strain of the Republican Party would look at something like this program with a lot of cynicism and distrust, and that's where we're working currently.
I'd just like to add that there were about 30 Democrats who voted against the amendments, so it is not purely a partisan issue. Some of it's ideologic, some of it is trading votes. I'll vote for this if you vote for my bill. And some of it is bringing money into districts. So we really want to hold all our representatives and senators to be accountable for the program itself. We can send out a link that can tell you how your representative voted. I'm originally from Oregon, so I know that a very surprising Representative Schrader and Blumenauer voted against the amendments. So it's important to go ahead and look at those votes and make sure that you're, again, that's part of putting the pressure on our legislators and letting them know that they're being watched about how they vote and that there is a strong contingent who want reductions in nuclear weapons and ultimate elimination.
Well, thank you very, very much, Catherine and Ashish. We appreciate your being so generous with your time and with your information. And thank you to everyone at home who joined us. Thank you for attending the webinar. Please be on the lookout for some follow-up materials from us. We're going to, when you sign out of the webinar, a follow-up survey will be available, and we really appreciate your feedback and welcome it as we continue to plan our webinar calendar for the rest of the year. And we'll also be sending you an email with the materials that were presented in the webinar, and that should be coming by the end of the week. And just as a heads up, our next webinar will take place on Wednesday, July 24th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. It's going to feature a presentation from the Honorable Donia Aziz, a former member of Pakistan National Assembly, Colorado State Representative Angela Williams, and Tanya Henderson, who is our Women, Peace, and Security Policy Director at WAND. That webinar will discuss our Women, Peace, and Security program and the essential role of women at the peace tables to resolve conflict. So again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And with that, we will end the webinar.
Thank you all.